Welcome back to my YouTube channel. In this video, I'll show you how to install relays for the headlamp and fog lamps. I purchased my 86 SVO back in 2003, and during the first 9 or so years, my fog lights worked a total of zero nada days. The other reason that I did this on my SVO was that the low beams also started to flicker. So why use relays? The factory design of the headlight circuit in our cars runs all the current for the lights through the headlight switch, which is the reason why the switches usually fail over time. The relay transfers the heavy current load in amps away from the switch. The switch still functions, but it only carries a minimal amount of current used to enable or activate the relays. This is the proper way to switch large amounts of current, but it was less expensive to use the dash-mounted headlight switch. So I guess the beam counters won again. Go figure. Do you need to run relays on all the lights? No, a lot of people just put the fog lights on a relay and avoid melting the fog light switch. This is also acceptable, but I figured do it once, do it right. A quick search of the internet brings up several sites that show the basics for wiring relays. All the sites recommend using a 30 amp relay to handle the current draw of the bulbs. Current draw in amps on the halogen bulbs is actually a lot less than the relay's 30 amp rating, so follow along. Low beams are generally rated at 45 watts and 65 watts for the high beams. To figure the current draw, divide the wattage figure by the source voltage, 12.5 volts DC on average, so amps equals watts divided by voltage in DC. So the amperage draw is 3.6 and 5.2 amps respectively for the low and high beams. Don't forget to multiply each of these by 2 because there's 2 headlights. The current draw is 7.5 amps for the low beam circuit and about 10.5 amps for the high beam circuit. So the 30 amp relay is way overkill by a factor of 2.5. I use a dedicated relay for each pair of low beams, high beams, and fog lights, so 3 relays in total. Once you have the necessary materials, the next thing you need to do is determine a suitable mounting location for the 3 relays. I used the space on the back side of the rad support just in front of the battery. I mounted all 3 relays to a small metal bracket and then mounted the bracket to the radiator support. Here's a copy of the factory wiring diagram specific to the SVO. The headlight power feed wires are below the battery tray, so the tray needs to be removed to access these wires. The fog light power feed is on the other side under the airbox. More on this later. Once you have access to the factory harness, cut the red-black wire for the low beams, the green-black wire for the high beams, the fog light circuit is on the other side of the engine bay under the factory airbox. So if you're using the stock running gear, the airbox and VAM needs to be removed to gain access. The new fog light relay is configured the same way for the fog light circuit with the following exceptions. First, fog light uses tan and orange wires which need to be cut into. Next, the power feed, which is the 10 gauge, needs to be routed from the relay terminal 87, which is on the driver's side, all the way across the radiator support to the side of the factory wiring harness feeding the fog lights. Make sure you solder this connection. Last, a separate 14 gauge wire needs to be soldered from the factory harness back to the relay terminal number 86. I used the factory wiring loom that runs on the back side of the radiator support to hide these 2 new wires. Mounting the relays near the battery keeps the power feed wires short, which is better for the circuit. Shorter wire equals less resistance, which is higher current delivered to the lights. 12 volt can be sourced from the hot side of the starter relay through a 20 amp inline fuse. I actually used a single 20 amp circuit breaker for the power feed to both high and low beams to both relays. and connected to terminal number 30 using 10 gauge wire. Once the power feed is connected to the relays, be sure to ground the relays via terminal number 85 using 14 gauge wire. I use the relay mounting stud as the ground location. Then solder and run a 14 gauge wire from the original harness to the relay switch side, terminal number 86. The last connection goes from the relay output terminal, which is terminal 87, back to the original harness that feeds power to the lights. Again, be sure to solder all connections where two wires are joined and add heat shrink tubing to these solder joints. Once you have everything wired, soldered, and sealed up, I recommend that you test the circuits before reinstalling the battery tray, VAM, and airbox. I left a 12-volt battery on the floor of my garage and just used standard jumper cables to connect it to the car. Good luck with your upgrade and happy motoring at night with brighter, more reliable lights. If this is your first time watching one of my videos, please consider subscribing to my channel. Don't forget to hit the like button and feel free to comment below. I generally respond to all the comments. And thanks for watching.